Hi, I'm Wendy Turner, Executive Director of Michigan Public. You might have heard that public media is under threat. You're not wrong. But I come to tell you that your voice has power. Visit protectmypublicmedia.org, contact your lawmakers, and take a stand today.
From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
The DeVos political machine is back, announcing that they are publicly re-engaging in Michigan politics ahead of the 2026 election.
The DeVos political operation has been largely quiet since now former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos tendered her resignation in the final days of President Donald Trump's first term. She was upset then with his rhetoric following the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
The DeVoses have been quiet, but not absent. They have continued to donate and support conservative causes and candidates, but this really does feel like an emergence. We also have recently heard from former Governor Rick Snyder. So to help us understand what all of these announcements mean for the state and for the state of politics, we are joined by Chad Livengood, politics editor at the Detroit News. Chad, hi.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, tell us about this new organization, Michigan Forward Network.
Well, this is an organization that appears to be getting seed money from Dick and Betsy DeVos. Dick DeVos, as people would know, remember, was the 2006 Republican candidate for governor. Famously spent $36 million of his own money. He's of the Amway heirs and did not win that election, but has remained very engaged. Betsy was the chair of the Michigan Republican Party and then went on to become education secretary under President Trump in his first administration. They have maintained a pretty well-oiled machine in Lansing for many years, but it has been a little under the radar in the Whitmer era. And now they are coming out with the creation of a new group called Michigan Forward Network. And Michigan Forward Network is going to be run by Ronna McDaniel, the granddaughter of the late Governor George Romney, who went on to become the chair of the Republican National Committee, and also Shane Hernandez, who was his former state rep, chaired the House Appropriations Committee, and was the Republican nominee for lieutenant governor a couple years ago. And so they're going to run this new organization, and some of the DeVos operatives from the other groups, like the Michigan Freedom Fund, which is an organization they started kind of after they got the right to work law passed in 2012, and the Great Lakes Education Project are going to come into this new organization. This organization is reportedly going to be the permanent ground troops operation for Republicans, for electing Republicans, essentially an infrastructure of the get out the vote operations that instead of setting it up every 2 years, 6-7 months before the election, they want to keep an operation in place so they can continuously elect Republicans without being subject to the whims of the changing leadership of the Michigan Republican Party.
What do we know about why the DeVosses are publicly re-engaging now? What do we know about the timing of this?
Well, the timing is that there is a major election coming on the horizon in 2026 with the governor's office, secretary of state, attorney general, the state senate, state house, all up for grabs. In addition, a U.S. Senate seat and 3, maybe 4 or 5 seats in Congress are going to be in play in Michigan. And so it's shaping up to be the biggest year, maybe in history for the state, to have this many significant races that could determine, control of the U.S. House, control the Senate. And we know from our cycles of the last half century, essentially, is that the party out of power typically gets back in power in the governor's office. And so Republicans are favored kind of coming in the door here to win this with Gretchen Whitmer, the Democrat term limited at the end of 2026.
Chad, you mentioned something interesting just a minute ago, which was the Michigan Republican Party in all of this, that some of the Michigan Forward Network is possibly taking up this sort of vacuum of leadership that we saw during some pretty chaotic times in recent memory within the Michigan Republican Party. How do we see the DeVosses playing ball with the Michigan Republican Party, or is this going to take over as the GOP in charge in Michigan?
Yeah, well, that remains to be seen if this is really just an alternative to the Michigan Republican Party. On its face, the infrastructure, the faces. I mean, Ronna McDaniel used to be the chair of the Michigan Republican Party before got jumped to the big leagues to the RNC. And the Michigan Republican Party itself as an entity has been in shambles for a couple years. Last year, they had kind of, you would say, almost an emergency manager came in one Pete Hoekstra, former congressman from West Michigan, who is now the ambassador, Trump's ambassador to Canada. He took over after the party leadership essentially threw out Christina Caramo, who had run the organization kind of into the ground financially. They were down to like $35,000 at one point, and just so people understand, can't run the Michigan Republican Party for probably a day or two on that kind of money during an election year. And so there was essentially Michigan GOP was on fumes. They were, they had left and abandoned their longtime headquarters building in downtown Lansing. So Paramo got kicked out, and Hoekstra took over and kind of got it professionalized again for a while and got the Republicans through the election, helped deliver Michigan for Donald Trump, helped the Republicans flip the state house. But that was mostly because the House Republican Campaign Committee had long given up on Karamo's crew being able to have the mechanisms and money to deliver. They went out and recruited former Governor Rick Snyder and some of his friends and allies to go be their kind of fundraising voice. And essentially, they were already abandoning the Michigan Republican Party. So this new DeVos outfit seems to have to be poised to fill some of those voids and maybe partner with other Republican organizations like the National Republican Senatorial Committee, which will essentially kind of dump in tens of millions of dollars on whoever the nominee is for the U.S. Senate next year. And of course, the Republican National Committee, which typically will coordinate with the state Republican Party on sending in campaign troops and money for advertising. But that's during an election year. So this new group will have the mechanisms sort of set up so they're not just kind of scrambling every cycle to build up their infrastructure again.
Chad, the DeVos name, it's a flashpoint in Michigan politics. Sure, Republicans are happy to have their support, but Democrats, progressives will name check the DeVosses in campaign materials, fundraising blasts. I'm not sure there is a more prominent name that has that kind of emotional impact in Michigan. What are Democrats saying about this announcement now?
Well, this is interesting because you bring that up because not too distant past, the Michigan Freedom Fund and the Great Lakes Education Project, which is kind of like a pro charter school operation arm of the DeVos family, they were always very careful not to like wear their DeVos tattoo on their shoulder. Or at least cover their sleeve, so to speak. This group came out with like a statement from Dick DeVos saying, we got to do this for the good of the state. And me and my family are putting money where our mouth is again here. Because for the longest time, Democrats just used the DeVosses as the boogeyman. And I don't know if that boogeyman shtick has kind of run its course, if people don't care anymore, or it's not as politically volatile as it was in those, maybe that first 10 years after Dick DeVos ran for governor. But yeah, the Democrats are definitely going to still try to characterize this group as the sort of the shill, operation for the West Michigan billionaire clan. But whether that kind of holds water still in this climate of billionaires on both sides that are putting money into candidates, and we'll see that probably in the race for governor, I would predict. I'm not sure that that's necessarily always the same impact as it did. The sting is not there like it was a decade ago.
We're speaking with Chad Livengood, politics editor at the Detroit News. So, Chad, another name from the political Wayback Machine, Governor Rick Snyder. He was at the Mackinac Policy Conference last week, the first time actually that he's been back at the conference since he left office. Rick, you spoke with him about the role that he sees himself playing in the future in Michigan politics and policy, and it had something to do with the Michigan Forward Network.
There are a number of people that are rational people that want to be politically active, and we're doing it sort of outside the Republican Party. I respect the party. They had a lot of issues, as you know. They're restoring a lot of good things going on, but there are ways people can create their own sort of coalitions and alliances.
So I thought that was interesting, not a full-throated endorsement of the GOP, but basically saying he sees himself working in the future with Michigan Forward Network. He also spoke with your outlet, The News. What did you hear from him?
Um, I hear, well, one, it was interesting to see Rick Snyder like kind of wandering around the Grand Hotel with his backpack, like he was just another tech executive there to learn about public policy. And yet here it's a two-term governor. But nonetheless, I think that he's trying to stay engaged in the subjects and not just be putting money into winning elections. He wants to put money into what he believes are issues that need to get fixed. And this is very much, the mantra of the Snyder era as well. And so in the last cycle, he helped Matt Hall become speaker. He went out, raised money for House Republicans. Now he's pledging that he wants to put in $20 to $30 million into a campaign to make education the key issue of the 2026 election and force candidates for office to tell voters how they're going to fix schools, what's their plan. And so this is interesting. A lot of people, some people in town kind of observe, well, where was this Rick Snyder in 2014? Or right at the end of 2014, when he had all the momentum after winning re-election, he had the political capital. He didn't seem to come out of the chute in 2015 with any kind of a plan on education. I mean, obviously, he was still mired in road funding problems at that time. And then, of course, his term took a complete different turn by the late 2015 with the emergence of the Flint water crisis, which consumed much of his last term. So you can also view this as this is Rick Snyder getting back engaged after the criminal prosecutions have ended. They didn't go anywhere against him and his former aides, and now he's trying to reengage publicly on this big topic that we know, given the man's many degrees, he does care deeply about this.
I mean, as you pointed out, that Rick Snyder is kind of a unique presence on the landscape, the political and policy landscape in Michigan. What do we know about will this work?
Well, we don't really know what his bigger plan is here and what it's going to do. I mean, education policy is so personal and so fractured, and you just see what's going on right now in school districts. School boards are just tearing their hair out. Social politics and social issues getting gummed up into local school debates and policy arguments and whatnot at the local level. Then you would take it to the Lansing level, going into that Mackinac conference. K-12 schools themselves were not on the agenda for the main stage. I mean, the only person who really made it part of the agenda was Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, and he used it as part of sort of his platform for his independent run for governor. Now, this is going to be interesting to watch. If Rick Snyder is trying to engage candidates on education policy, is he going to be pushing Republican candidates for governor on this, or is this more targeted at the legislature? If he doesn't get the governor candidates engaged, we could start to question what the purpose of this is. Or is Rick Snyder not going to get behind the Republican nominee for governor? I think is kind of an open question still, particularly given how close of a relationship he ended up forging with one Mike Duggan, the independent now candidate for governor, who's kind of mucked this up a little bit in the race for governor next year.
I mean, go back years to the Mackinac Conference itself and the grand bargain, which many credit Rick Snyder, Mike Duggan for being the folks behind making that actually happen.
In that second term, almost on a weekly basis, in the beginning of Mike Duggan's term as mayor in 2014, he met with Rich Baird, Rick Snyder's right-hand man, for lunch almost every week. I mean, these guys are pretty close. They all kind of went to University of Michigan, except for Baird, in the same era in the early 80s. They're of like mind. CEO fix-it types. And so I wouldn't discount, especially now that Duggan has planted this flag of accountability. And if you go read the Mike Duggan school accountability plan,
Mhm.
it's firing principals after 3 years and the school is still failing. It's firing the superintendent after 5 years. It is right of center, to say the least. It's almost, if you read it 10 years ago, you would have thought it actually came out of the Great Lakes Education Project, the DeVos outfit. That's the feel of it. And this is coming from a Democrat from Detroit who has, historically been pro-charter and whatnot. So I think there's some forces here that might intersect at some point in the next 16 months or so.
Part of what Duggan put out was $4.5 billion over a few years going into the education system. There were a lot of folks I heard on the island and off who were remarking, thinking it was interesting. Interesting was one of the words they used, that Rick Snyder was re-engaging on the topic of education when we all remember, massive cuts to Michigan's education system in that first year of Governor Snyder's first term when they were trying to balance the budget.
Yeah, they had a over $1 billion deficit because they were trying to cut taxes for business, which was his main priority, and they had to slash higher education by 15%. K-12 schools also took a haircut, and of course, you might remember in 2014 they had to do a lot of fiscal gymnastics to show that school funding was up. It was the issue that Mark Schauer had tried to prosecute against Rick Snyder in his reelection. So yes, now we are here 10 years later talking about it, and Snyder's trying to re-engage on the subject. At the same time that Duggan is trying to go out and justify his existence in this race, tell people he's not just here to be a spoiler, he's here to win. And he thinks he's got a subject, education reform, that's going to resonate with voters broadly.
I don't need to tell you, but man, it seemed like a lot of the folks on Mackinac, even though, as you noted, Chad, in a column that you wrote, education wasn't necessarily on the main stage. What I kept hearing from folks is that they see 2026, at least the gubernatorial election, is going to be an election about education in Michigan.
Yeah, when we got our fourth graders are 44th in the country in reading, and you see Mississippi having surged from 49th in the country when Rick Snyder was governor to now 9th in the country in fourth grade reading. There's a real sting to it, I think. But you can see politically how anybody running for governor is going to need to have a plan and be able to articulate it in order to get voters' attention. Because if you're in your 30s and 40s and you got kids in school right now, this is a big subject for you. And so that's why it wasn't too surprising that Duggan used his time on stage not to talk about look how many houses I had torn down in Detroit, but to pivot into a speech that was really a speech declaring war on partisanship and trying to put his plan on the table first and get the conversation going about education reform in the state.
Which is a topic of statewide interest.
Absolutely.
Mike Duggan, Rick Snyder, the DeVosses, all names coming back to the forefront as we look ahead to election 2026 with Chad Livengood, politics editor at the Detroit News. Chad, thanks so much for the time. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, Zoe and Rick. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.